This week, Evan and Mikael strapped on swords and went on a suicide mission to save Japan. Because this week, we watched 13 Assassins.
Welcome back to How Did You Miss This? A show where we tend to the gaping wounds in our movie watching history. I'm Evan Toller-Hickey, and with me as always, Michael Hansen and Chris Deshane. And today we're going to be talking about the 2010 film 13 Assassins. This is a remake of the 1963 movie of the same name. It pulls in from lots of different samurai films. It has been voted one of the top 10 samurai films ever by the British Film Institute. So, Michael, how did we miss this?
Actually, I said that I missed it. I didn't actually miss it.
Ooh,
I remembered as I was watching this that, you know what, I've watched it before. I must have gotten very confused between 13 Assassins, Seven Samurai, whatever that Keanu Reeves movie was. I think I just got it completely mixed up between all the number of movies. So I had watched it. I remember having rented it before, but this was actually, spoiler, a very welcome return to this one. So yes, I watched it before. Super glad I watched it again. How about you, Evan?
Well, I missed this somehow, and I'm not entirely sure how, because I actually like Takashi Miike films. Takashi Miike, the director of this film, did Audition, 1999. He did Ichi the Killer. The last one of his that I saw in theaters was Sukiyaki Western Django, which I think was 2007. Now, Takashi Miike puts out, like, I don't know, 107 films a year or something. The dude is super prolific. So maybe this just got kind of lost in the shuffle to me. But boy, I was really, really excited when I watched it all the way through and stayed to the very end of the credits, and then saw that it was directed by Takashi Miike, because I didn't even realize that through the whole thing, and then went, oh, amazing. I've checked another one off the list. This is great. But Chris, you voted for this. I believe that you have seen this before. What is your relationship to this film, and why is it that you were like, dudes, how did you miss this?
Yeah, so apparently Michael hadn't, but when I saw both of you guys had missed this is another one of those movies that for me was a lot like The Town, where it's like, okay, solid characters in this movie, great action, very well shot, put together. Like, it's a good all around movie, I think. And one that when it kind of comes up and I realized you guys were both like, huh? I was like, okay, well, cool. This is an opportunity to throw something in that neither of you had seen. And personally, I'm a fan of samurai movies. I'm not going to say like, I'm deep there in the knowledge of all things samurai, but they certainly hold a spot in my heart. So yeah, I mean, when you hadn't seen it, it was an exciting chance. This is something I've seen probably, a few times since it came out in 2010. And, like you're saying, originally saw it because I was aware of Takashi Miike's other movies, or at least some of his other movies. Like you're saying, there's a stretch he was making like 4 to 6 movies a year every year. So there's a lot that I haven't seen, but knew he made some cool, violent stuff when it was samurai stuff and it had good reviews. Was looking forward to it. So maybe before we get into talking about what we actually thought about this movie, we want to talk quickly about how it came to be. So for most folks, like you said, Evan, Takashi Miike kind of came into their awareness either through Ichi the Killer or Audition, especially being part of that wave of kind of like the Japanese horror that came around, the turn of the millennia, with movies like Ringu and The Grudge and Cure and all sorts of stuff, many of which got remade into Western movies over that period. But Audition was one of those ones that I remember seeing in that era. And so he kind of became much more familiar, I think, with Western audiences. Like you said, he's made a ton of movies over the last while, often being kind of like Yakuza or samurai or horror or thriller, often mixing in weird other stuff in there, either comedy. He's got a zombie family musical in amongst that list. Like, it's often a weird mix up of stuff, and he often says like that categories, genres of movies are really more for people reviewing them than people making them. And so one of the things that has often stood out in a lot of his movies is just the controversy around the level of gore and violence that goes into them. So, I think there's elements of that you can see in parts of this movie, though not nearly as visceral or whatever as in his many other ones. And this is a movie that came about, like you said, in 1999. He had Daisuke Tengen, who's one of the folks he worked with writing Audition, adapt the screenplay from the original 1963 movie made by Eiichi Kudo. And we'll get into where it draws on some other inspiration. But when they made this movie was only made on a budget of $6 million, which I don't know how that fares in Japanese filmmaking, but for me, that stands out as not a big pile of cash to make a, lengthy, drawn out, war movie.
Yeah, I think they've put every dollar of that up on the screen. For $6 million budget and a big cast, 13 assassins people, plus the person that they need to assassinate, plus his army. Yeah. So they did a lot with 6 million, and that's super impressive. But it only makes about $18 million back. And you know what? Like, that's actually, when you think about it, a pretty good return on investment, making 3 times what it put out. But it also means that not a lot of people ended up really seeing it outside of Japan. That said, it got some really solid reviews. Roger Ebert, for instance, and we speak to his stuff a fair amount, but he gave it 3.5 stars and named it one of the best movies of the year. It's got a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, even though this movie in Canada right now when we're recording is nearly impossible to find. So I'm glad that we were able to track down copies for this. So Michael, now that you have seen this, I guess twice, is this a movie that you're happy that you've seen twice? I think you gave us a little bit of a spoiler. And is it a movie that you would recommend other people see? I'm
incredibly happy I watched it again, and I will recommend it to anyone within, and we'll talk about this a little bit, within this set of, people who like this genre of movies. But 100% super glad I watched it again, and I would recommend this to anyone who I think like this type of movie.
Yeah, I'm with you. I am so happy to have seen this movie, and I would happily recommend it to the people who I think would enjoy all the things about this movie that I enjoyed. It is not for everyone. It is definitely not for everyone.
Right. Let's be super clear.
Yes, this
not
movie
for everyone.
Not for everyone. But if you're someone who digs gore and samurais and wicked fight scenes, you know what? Probably one that you don't want to miss. Well, how about you, Chris? You've seen this film, 4, 5, 6, 7 times now?
Probably more like the 4. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's a movie I have recommended clearly. So I mean, I think you guys have kind of touched on if you're a little bit squeamish around gore. I mean, there's some terrible stuff that people do to each other. Well, one person in particular does to people in this movie, which could definitely upset people who are a little bit more sensitive. But otherwise, I mean, it's a pretty solid, action samurai movie. I'll also say that, if you don't like subtitles, I probably wouldn't recommend the version of this movie that's dubbed, because the dubbed version I heard of this movie was not great. So if you're not a subtitle person, you might want to dodge that too. But otherwise, like it's a pretty awesome movie. So definitely recommended for me. So maybe that's a good spot to take a quick break. And on the other side, we can talk about what made this movie awesome and what made it a little iffy for some viewers. Well, hi there. So we're going to get into all the details about this movie. If you don't like spoilers, we will do those a lot coming right up. So, a quick recap of what this movie is about. So a group of samurais gets tasked with assassinating the shogun's sadistic brother. That's Lord Naritsugu. And this group of assassins methodically plans an ambush and faces off against Naritsugu's forces in a small mountain village. Now, this movie is very interestingly paced. Like basically you can break this up into the 3 acts where you find out about, the overall plot and Lord Naritsugu and what a bad person he is. And then it goes into, planning and preparing for the ambush, and then just a 45-minute roller coaster battle to top the movie off. So I'm curious what each of you kind of felt about the structure and pacing that kind of plays out in that 3-part movie.
I loved everything about this pacing. I am a huge fan of the Kurosawa Seven Samurai movie, and for me, this kind of like follows it beat by beat in some ways. Some of the setup is different, some of the motivation why they do things is different, but I'm very comfortable with the structure of initial need to do something, preparation, and then a really long extended battle scene. I think actually this tightened it a little bit, and I didn't think anything felt long or stretched out. I was super pleased with the pacing, how they structured it, the setup. They gave the characters enough time to really understand why they're doing what they're doing. So I don't know. I have nothing to complain about when it comes to that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael. The pacing is really interesting. It's one of the first notes that I wrote down when I was watching this, is that the pacing is so different than so many of the other movies we've watched. It feels like it is building towards something momentous, that in the beginning, peace has been shattered. And so the pacing is quiet and a bit slow, but there are these flurries of activity, of thought, of, ooh, we want to maintain the peace. We want to try to keep things going. Oh, but can we keep the status quo? And then that second act starts to feel like, okay, now we're marching forward. Things are happening. Things start getting a little bit more, not frenzied, but there is definitely a sense of urgency that's happening. And that made this third act, the battle in the village, just so satisfying, because you've been waiting, it's going to happen, and it just keeps you wanting, and then it delivers for 45 minutes. So I was really fascinated by the pacing. I think that it is done really, really, really well, in the way that it underscores just the sense of the film itself.
Yeah, I think one of the things too that it winds up doing very well as a result of that very kind of, like you're saying, it's like, if it's a 3-speed machine, it's on very low speed in the beginning, then kind of medium speed, and then it picks up to just a full out, full ahead kind of speed right at the end. And part of the thing that first act being a little bit slower lets them do, I think, well, and this also partly ties back to the violence that we kind of talked about, is set up Lord Naritsugu as a bad dude. Like there's enough.
Boy. I'm not just a bad dude. I mean, this like truly sociopathic, repugnant dude. Like, yeah. Oh man, I don't know that we've seen a movie with this awful a person, like in it.
Yeah, I mean, like to your point, he is full on sociopathic. Just trying to feel anything. I think through doing these terrible things to others and having no boundaries put on him because of his position as the shogun's brother and seems like eventual successor, and just trying to feel anything because nobody's ever put any rules around him. So why not? I can do all these things, and you stupid samurai aren't going to stop me because it's your job to protect me, you dum dums. So why don't I hack off some limbs and shoot some kids and oh boy, all the things he does. But you really, really loathe him by the end of that first act.
I think this is, we probably need to cover this right up front to say Miike is very similar to Tarantino in the sense of, like, you could say, oh, would it be great if some Tarantino movies were a little bit scaled down because then I would be able to show them to such and such. But then at some point there wouldn't be a Tarantino movie anymore. And I think it's the exactly same thing here to say you could have gotten that point across without some of the choices he made, but then of course it wouldn't be his style of a movie. So what you need to be super clear with anyone watching this is to say, yeah, like there are two things going on. One is there's a movie that could have, in my mind, been told very well with some terrific messages without some of the gratuitous sort of violent acts and details. But at the same time, like, that's his style. Like, he's making the movie that he needed to make it. Like, that's true to him. So you need to go into this with both those things in mind to say, yes, in the way that you would watch a Tarantino movie, am I okay to watch these things? And if so, you can also enjoy some very deep things going on. But we have to be hyper clear about this for anyone considering watching it. Like, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, there are no redeeming characteristics at all to Naritsugu. There is no push to make us sympathize with him in any way, or oh, he's doing this because he was unloved. He is a terrible human being. And one of the things that I really loved about his characterization was that he is kind of horrible at every level in terms of the taboos that he will break and the decorum that he will break and the rules that he will violate. And that goes from the horrendous things that he will do with rape and murder and dismemberment and torture. But Miike also takes these moments to show that he will do it even in the small things where he's been served this meal and he sort of is about to eat and then looks at his chopsticks and tosses them aside and then takes all of these carefully prepared dishes and smushes them together on his plate to make like just a big pile of mush and then eats it like an animal, and then is like, bring me 2 women tonight. And you're like, oh no. Like, not only do I fear for these women, but it's just like watching someone eat like that is viscerally disturbing as well.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it's one of the things that they do very well is setting him up in this position to be so just all around, depraved in this movie in every single way that you can think of, because it very much sets it up to tie into a lot of the themes that carry through in the movie around justice and duty and honor and what's the right version of those things, because you have samurai trying to protect him, Lord Naritsugu. So Hanbei, who's his like right-hand man and protector, trying to protect him because that's what you're supposed to do as a samurai, even though I know he's terrible and I'm trying to stop him from doing terrible things. And on the other side, you've got Shinzemon, who's the lead, played by Koji Yakusho, who is also, trying to serve justice, trying to carry out his duty and trying to be honorable, but in a much more individualistic way, where he's following his own code rather than the code of the samurai. So I'm curious how you both felt those themes kind of like tied into the movie and played out throughout.
Well, I thought those themes played extremely well. And in fact, to me, the opening shots really kind of nailed down these themes. So the opening shot of this is a lord committing harakiri. So he's doing a ritual suicide. And the framing of it is incredibly strong because he is in the middle of the shot, and that is not something you see super often. Usually characters on screen are in one of sort of the other thirds of the sides, because it gives a sense of interest to the eye when you're looking at it like this. But he's in the middle, which is very, very much in keeping with the way that Kurosawa shot a lot of things. And I watched Rashomon recently, and so much of that framing, when the characters are delivering their stories, is the same kind of thing where they are so central to the frame. And when you have someone that central to the frame and that they are committing ritual suicide for honor, it really does feel like the theme of honor is literally put front and center in so many ways. And so I thought that was really interesting. Then I found out also that opening scene was almost shot for shot for the original opening of the 1963 13 Assassins. So it adds this other layer that's really interesting of calling back to the original that, is also at a time that Kurosawa would have been making films. And so that's really kind of influential in that. So talking back or hearkening back to its predecessor, but also really making its themes front and center. I thought it was kind of a masterful opening.
Yeah, I'll say one of the things about the opening too, that I found quite different. To your point, like the framing is different, but also there's no sound other than wind blowing and the sound of Lord Mamiya stabbing himself and killing himself. And I think, to your point, the lack of scoring or anything else under that besides like some wind blowing in the background helps, to your point, bring like, what is the point of this movie? Like really into focus. There's nothing to distract here from this thing that is front and center in front of your eyes of this guy killing himself, which you then find out is because he's leaving a note because he's so upset about Lord Naritsugu. Like front and center, no music, no extras, just like this is the shot.
I think there are two things. Like one is, yes, super strong opening, incredibly strong opening. Like that gets your attention right away. But the theme around honor, in this particular case, you don't really get the full implication of that until later. But then when you look at like the thread of it, so both sides have it. Even Hanbei, who is on the side of the evil lord, he has this whole thing around like just the fate has dealt him this cards. He's in service of this lord. Like, what's he going to do? Like he's at the core, he's still a samurai. He has to do this. And on the flip side, you have the people who say, like at the top, you couldn't officially sanction the killing of this terrible person because he has a position that he's going to attain. So like honor goes throughout this entire thing, and everyone has to play out their version of honor in a different way, but it's constant throughout the entire thing, including in the commentary of the people who are not samurai to say, like, you samurai, you're just nuts. Like, but all this chatter about this and this and this, but it's a constant thread throughout everything that they do in this movie. And I just love that part. That's one of these buttons for me where I just go, oh yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and I mean, like Evan said, this is clearly a little bit of a Miike's love note to samurai movies, because it does draw on so many other movies. Like you said, I mean, it is based on that 1963 movie, so the plot is kind of cribbed from that. But a lot of the beats, like you were kind of pointing out, are drawn more from Seven Samurai in terms of that pacing and that build up for that big climactic battle. And there's also lots of other things that came from other movies. Like, Shinzemon in this movie is much more akin to Kurosawa's character from Sanjuro, where he's kind of this wise, thoughtful, experienced samurai, and similar for a lot of the other characters. But I mean, probably the biggest thing that is the standout characteristic of this is that build up to that then on running battle through that last 45, 50 minutes of the movie. So, skipping ahead from Lord Naritsugu doing bad stuff, they make their plans and then they arrive in the mountain village waiting for Naritsugu to arrive. Like, what is that like for you guys as especially Evan, as the first time viewer of this nonstop running battle? What was it like watching it?
Oh man, I was so excited because they've been really leading up to this. You've got some of the training that they do earlier on, and they're like, if you don't have a sword, grab a stick. If you don't have a stick, grab a rock. If you don't have a rock, use your hands and fists. Like you have to kill everybody, and. So when you finally get this like super tense showdown, and you have Shinzemon reach into his robe and pull out the sign that the daughter of the peasant revolt had written with her mouth, because
Naritsugu's awful.
Because Naritsugu is awful and has dismembered her and cut out her tongue, and they show that they really show that in full frontal, and it is horrific and disturbing, and is one of the reasons why Shinzemon decides that he's going to take this job of leading this group of samurai killers. He pulls out that sign that she had written, or the message that she had written, that says "Total Massacre," and it's just such this beautiful callback that he's standing there in front of Naritsugu's army, and he pulls out the sign that says "Total Massacre," and I was just like, chef's kiss. That is fantastic. Thank you for tying all of that together. And then there's a total massacre, and there are cool traps, and there's cool fighting. And even before all that starts, you get this awesome view of the top of the town as the army's filing in, and you see like katanas like hiding in various parts of the like the roofs and in the roof lines and in bales of hay, and you're like, oh man, this is going to be amazing. And then suddenly there were flaming cows, and there were cows on fire running through the streets, and it was insane. And I literally yelled like, holy fuck, flaming cows. And it was delightful. What can I say? It was 45 minutes of complete carnage. And if you're into that kind of thing on screen, this was magnificent. This was a symphony of destruction.
I think it works so well because the lead up is so good. Like there are a couple of things they have to do in the lead up. They have to introduce the cause. Why are we doing this? They have to introduce the people, like who are involved in this. And, now we're 5, now we're 7, now we're 9, now we're 11. And then eventually they get up to 13 people. So by the time that they get into this final thing, it just makes perfect sense. Everything is led up to this point. They've done all the planning. They've done all the consideration. This thing that you were mentioning around the katanas being littered, like it is I didn't really understand it at first, but then I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what the John Wick 2 did in the catacombs. Like, you place the swords there because you need them. I'm just gonna pick up another one when I need it. Here and here and here. Everything is so well prepared. All the traps, all the things, all the like it's brilliant. And for me, it works because the lead up is so well executed that by the time you get there, it just seems like everything makes sense. It's the perfect setup, and you're just ready then for it to be. It could have been twice the length, and it just made sense because the execution was so well done.
Chris, is it still exciting seeing it time 4?
Yeah, I mean, I think you called out the flaming cows. That is probably one of the things that I don't love, but it's the only real use of CGI in this movie, and everything else is done practically. So even the fight scenes aren't sped up. There's nothing really sped up in the film. And the cows is only the really noticeable. And when the bridge explodes and some horses and stuff fall in, those are the only times CGI happen.
Oh no. Let's talk about the cows. I wrote down the only effect that is incredibly bad. It was like,
it's really bad.
It's really bad. Yeah.
If they had avoided that, everything would have been brilliant. But yeah, flaming cows, please ignore them. They last a very short time, and then you can presume to enjoy the movie, but they're so bad.
Back to the $6 million, and they spent every penny of it. And so I'll just say, like, I do notice those when I rewatch it, but I don't care because the rest of the fights are so good. And one of the things that I love, so everything from the moment where Kuranaga says, "We commemorate your passage with arrows," is like, that's the starter's pistol. Then they start trying to like shoot Naritsugu with arrows, and then it's just on like Donkey Kong, and arrows and swords and explosions and everything from there is just great. One of the things that I love about how the fight scenes are choreographed is they kind of alternate between moments of just like wide shots of, like you're saying, at first kind of the town as they come in, and then wide shots of some of these battles going on, then into some tight shots of the individuals who you don't remember all of the samurai's names. You don't need to. There's only a couple you need to know, and the rest are like, and that guy too. But what I do love is that mega spoiler, there's one of them who survived. Well, one, we'll talk about that later. Who survive basically out of everyone, the 200 bad guys and the 13 assassins, 2 people survive. But I love that everybody kind of gets a moment, even when they get killed, to be like to your point, Evan, where it was like, if you don't have a sword, pick up a stick or a rock, or you're just going out and taking as many of them as you can with you. And they all get that moment throughout the scenes. And probably one of my favorite is when Hirayama's student, the sword master guy,
the young one,
the young one is dying, looking at Hirayama taking out guys, and then literally fighting with his hands and a rock before he kind of dies as well. Like everybody gets that moment to be like, oh, okay. As much as I don't know their names, what I appreciate is they all came into this like with that theme of like honor, and we're doing something worthwhile, especially in this samurai culture that has been kind of dwindling or disappearing over the last 200 years of peace. And now we get to do something real and meaningful. And the difference isn't that we can fight better than they can, because none of us fight very well, but that like we're coming in to do this right and go out like real samurai. And that's what I love throughout that big fight. And it still holds up for me.
I think you touched on 2 points that stood out for me. One was, you mentioned Hirayama, and when he presents his pupil, there's this whole discussion about like, is he too young? And there's this whole thing around like, that the devotion doesn't know age, and it is so samurai. It is so Japanese, because it's the whole thing where there's this exchange around like, oh, my logic was too shallow. May we ask for your help? And that way of rephrasing it is so honorable. Like, this is again like one of these illustrations of like how you flip it around to say, we not just saying, oh, I'm sorry I said that, but it's like flipping it around in a way of saying what you bring and your devotion to it. And the way of doing it is just like, for me, it's like a perfect illustration of it. Then the flip side though, one of the things I had about this movie, and this is going to sound terrible, I could not honestly, I could not keep track of everyone's name and who they were at all times because everyone are dressed the same. Everyone has the same top knot hair
Yeah.
and cut.
Black outfit.
And
Yep.
the names are not super intuitive to remember. So there were times when I was like, wait, which one is this? And that would not be a problem the third viewing, but there were times when I was like, I don't know who just died.
But you do know which
Is this
side
an
they're
important
on.
character?
You do know, because
absolutely.
it's very clear these are one of the 13 versus these are the prince's bodyguard or whatever. They're all at least dressed. So I will say you can at least, and I understand first viewing versus second viewing versus whateverth viewing for me. But I will say, like, I think you can at least follow who is who. It would be very easy to perhaps lose track of them if they didn't have kind of the different wardrobe, helmets, whatever garb that the Nartsugu's guys wear. So at least you can follow it. But to your point, which one? It can be easy to lose track of some of them for sure.
Don't get me wrong. Like the use of the round helmets, the use of the fact that the evil lord is the only one dressed in white like that, that's brilliant. But if you look at like the contrast with something like Star Wars, well, you have a Wookiee, you have a princess, you have a golden robot. Like, sure, and all the evil ones are like the white stormtroopers. Here, it was just between our 13. It wasn't always super easy for me to keep track of them. That's all I'm saying. But you're 100% right.
And I think that that's not something to really be ashamed of, Michael, because this also kind of felt a little bit like Platoon for me, where there are a few people that you really get to know. Like you really get to Shinzaemon, like his nephew. There's a couple of other characters that you sort of spend a little bit more time with as well. But there's like 7 of these samurai, perhaps, where they come in very, very quickly. It's sort of like, okay, here I am. Also, I'm bringing my 3 friends. Great. Thank you for joining us. And they disappear for a chunk of time when the party gets split up. And there are, we've been, here helping prep. So everybody, to Chris's point, does get like an amazing kind of send off. But there are a number of people who very sort of Platoon like are like, okay, so I sort of know who this is, but not really, but I know which side they're on. And okay, they had a really cool death and it was neat seeing them fight. But they're not, Shinzaemon, they're not Hirayama, they're not Shinrokuro or people like that.
One of the people yeah. I will say one of the things that I do enjoy about this movie too is the unevenness of the sword fighting in this movie between all of them too. And it was actually something that Miike made a point of with especially some of the younger actors who hadn't been in samurai movies and stuff before. I mean, they make a point early of calling it out of like, no real samurai has used their sword in battle in forever. So none of us really know how to do it. So it's a challenge for everybody. So there's only a couple people who look genuinely good with their swords. And he, in preparation for the movie, basically took a bunch of them and said, great, you've never done a samurai movie before? Cool. Here's a sword. That's it. No training, no classes, no whatever. So a lot of them went into it not knowing how to use a sword, because he wanted them to come across kind of in the same way that we're talking about them a little bit, is like these young samurai who have never done this before and aren't even that noteworthy other than they're looking for kind of a good samurai death, but they aren't brilliant swordsmen. They're just kind of like trying to overpower their enemy with their sheer will and defiance and whatever. Their goal of winning the day and killing this bad guy. But maybe here's a good spot for a break. And on the other side, maybe we can talk about some of the other ways that how this movie looks and how Miike puts the camera on a scene. We'll be right back. welcome back. So one of the things I would definitely want to talk about is how Miike uses the camera in this movie, because we talked a little bit earlier about, calling back to some of those samurai classics. And I think he does that not just in the story and some of the characters, but also in some of those shots, like wide panoramic shots of battles and landscapes and various things. Like, it's very similarly shot to some of Kurosawa's work, like you were saying, Evan. And one of the things that I found fascinating is that this was a movie shot almost entirely on natural light.
Like Amadeus.
But with a whole lot more swords.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That would have been a very different movie. I agree. The natural lighting immediately caught my eye. Along with those wide shots, and not just wide shots within, the sort of panorama of the landscape, but these really nice wide shots within the sort of the chamber pieces that were being done. I really thought that was effective. And again, with the way that the film is paced, and particularly in that first act, those wide shots give this sort of this sense of more of a slow build. And then when we're in the second act and we're walking through the forest, things start getting a little bit closer, and in fact go to handheld, because there is a lot of like big static shots earlier, and then we're into handheld, and I was like, oh no, handheld, but done very, very effectively, and made me feel very much more invested, more deeper in the scene. And so I thought that just across the board, the cinematography was done really well. And one of the other things I'd like to call out is Miike's use of reveals with the camera. He is so good. And this may come from kind of that horror background of keeping the camera on something, and you're just dreading what you're going to be seeing on the other side of it. And then particularly in the Naritsugu scenes, when the camera turns and you see what he's been working on, shooting a family, perhaps with an arrows for fun. It's so horrifying, and sort of, it is a beautiful, punchline's not the right word, but that's what it would be if it was a joke. Everything is perfectly set up to deliver this gut punch. It is so excellently done.
Yeah, I think to that point, to Naritsugu, it is kind of the punchline of a joke, right? And that's partly why,
to him, yeah.
And I think that's partly why those cuts and the editing are so effective. Unlike, we talked about Glengarry Glen Ross not too long ago, where it just flipped constantly and was a little bit disjointed. It feels like the cuts, the edits, those kinds of things are much more, like you're saying, intentional and impactful when they're happening here.
I thought it was so brilliantly done 99% of the entire thing.
Were the flaming cows the other 1%?
No, actually. There's one scene where there's a 90-degree flip of the camera to kind of show the point of view of a dying character. And that's the one time when I thought, I get what you're doing, but this was just, it took me out of the entire thing. Everything else, like you said, around like the nature shots, when to zoom in on a person's face, like the entire intro, it is way more gruesome to just show the facial acting of the person in the beginning killing himself than if they had shown the detail of it. Like all the zoom in, zooms out are brilliant, but this thing around the 90-degree flip for me was like, okay, well, hang on, like that for whatever reason took me out of it, but otherwise everything else I thought was just like so cleverly thought.
Yeah, not as egregious as the Enter the Dragon Kung Fu Cam flip, but I can see how that could be. Although I actually quite like that one because it's just that dying moment for him. But I can definitely say how that would work. I think one of the things for me too about the lighting in this movie, because the beginning of this movie is all kind of cloak and dagger stuff, right? The Sir Doi has to go and get somebody to go kill Lord Naritsugu, and the other people are aware that, well, he's got to do something, and they're trying to kind of sniff out what each other's plans are and what's happening, because it's all done in these chambers with candlelight and it's dim and it's shadows. Like, I think it really helps make that point of what's going on in that first act. Is it is all happening behind closed doors and nobody's really aware, and it is this very kind of stealthy exercise that's being undertaken. And then as you move on and you move outside and it lightens up a little bit, you still kind of get these great contrasts of moving through the kind of like shade of the jungle and then the more open space as you have this battle in the town. But I just love how much the lighting underscores just all this stuff that is top secret and stealthy and kind of ill intent stuff happening in the first act, which I thought the lighting really helped.
Yeah, and I think that to your point, the lighting is doing so much underscoring, and the music in this film isn't. There is a very minimal amount of score in this film, and that is really interesting and really effective. I mean, we spoke earlier about how that first scene of the suicide, you just hearing the wind and the sound that the sword is making as it rips through cloth and flesh. But all of these places where perhaps an American film, North American film might use sort of tense music to underscore this cloak and dagger stuff. It is silent. It is room tone and people just shifting, and that was extraordinarily effective to me. I started only really noticing the score when they were doing kind of these transition scenes of like, oh, now we're going to show horses. Now we're going to show, the horses galloping on their way to do this thing. So as we're cutting and traveling, now we have kind of that epic scoring. But when things are serious, we're using silence as the score, and it is just absolutely masterful.
Yeah, I think the silence throughout this film really plays out, and I think one of the things that it really helps you notice for me is some of the performance is delivered, especially for me by Koji Yakusho as Shinzemon. So for folks who don't know, Koji Yakusho is like a very celebrated Japanese actor. He's been working for over 45 years now, I guess 35 years or whatever it was when this movie was made. Very celebrated, awarded actor in Japan, as well as doing a number of pieces for international film companies. And like his role as Shinzemon, I think he is often having to be serious, but he has those moments where you just go like, oh wow. Like the moment for me when you have that discovery of the young woman who's had her arms and legs chopped off, and he just has that moment where it turns back on him and he smiles in this kind of like, whoa, what's going, and you realize he's like, finally, I have a reason to be alive again. And it just plays out so well on his face of just like that smile that he's able to put on. And I think there's something about his face. Anytime I see him smile throughout this movie where I'm just like, man, when that guy smiles, something's either like something really gets to me about how he's feeling. So I don't know about how you felt, but I really loved Koji Yakusho as Shinzemon in this movie.
I absolutely agree with you, Chris. I mean, I don't know that there are really any false notes, with Yakusho's performance, or really with any of the performances. They're just they're really excellent across the board. The supporting cast are watchable, so watchable, and everybody's like there to play. I particularly liked Hariyama. I thought it was just so badass, and it was just across the board, like really excellent performances. Some very small, very serious. Sir Doi comes to mind for that. Some that are comedic and pretty big, like Kiga Koyata, the woodsman. But they all feel like they're in the same movie, and they all feel like they are really invested in these performances.
Yeah, but particularly you need the central character. You need someone to bring sort of the 13 together, and I think that is so important, to have someone who's believable around, essentially coming back. The introduction of him, that scene of him sitting there fishing with the other fishermen, is just incredible. It's kind of like the whole representation of being brought back into real life, and then little by little, exactly like you said, the whole thing around fate having called him back there. His hands are shaking, and then he lets the moment sit, and he calms down, and essentially says, "Okay, I'm in." And then from that point on, all the people that they managed to bring together, it's so much of it is about him as the core. And I'm not sure what that would look like with anyone else. I don't think it would have been as effective, because his presence, he's so believable in his, what's driving him and why he's coming back to do this one thing. So yeah, I don't think you can say enough about his performance.
Yeah, I'm a very big fan. I mean, he's been in a couple other movies. I mean, in fact, he just won Best Actor at Cannes this year at the film festival too. So
oh wow,
he's somebody who's had kind of this enduring presence in Japanese film, because his big breakout role was Shall We Dance in the 90s, and here he is 30 years later still winning awards on an international stage. And I think, to your point, Michael, like I can't imagine too many other people kind of having the right gravitas, but also levity and whatever at the right moments too. But Evan, I think you're bang on too. Like I think there's those moments for everybody, even if you don't know everybody in detail. A lot of them get those moments, including what's his name, the Ronin guy. Perfect example. I can't remember his name. The Ronin guy with the spear, who's like, "Hey, I'll work for you, but you need to pay me." And they're like, "Well, shouldn't you be doing this for honor or whatever?" He's like, "Look, I got some debts and I want to bury my wife and make my own preparations." And, there's just those moments where you're like, all right, this is an all right guy. And to your point, Hirayama is just like a badass sword saint kind of dude. And it's very much of the like Musashi, dedicated to the sword. And when he goes through walls of guys one after another with real cuts, you're like, that guy actually looks like he knows what he's doing when he's swinging that sword. So they all get at least a little bit of character, even if not. I think the one character, we've kind of already talked about the character, but what about the performance of Goro Inagaki as Naritsugu?
Haunting. He's fantastic. Like he makes you hate him so much. And his death scene is really, really good, where he's like, "It hurts. I'm scared. This is the pain. It hurts. I'm scared." And it's like he's processing an emotion for the first time, that something has been done to him, and he's dragging himself across the ground, and but then is ultimately like, "Yeah, I'm going to die, but this has been the most interesting day of my life."
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, please somebody chop
Stab
off
him
this
again.
monster's head.
Yeah. It is one of those things that makes you want him to die all over again, because he's terrible. And as much as he has that moment of fear, it's also the like, finally, I felt something. Thank you, people, for giving me something to feel?
And there's the thing about that earlier as well. So first of all, about his performance up to that point has been all about expressing no emotion whatsoever. He is so crazily calm in everything he does that is scarier than anything else. If he had been over the top into it, maybe it would have been like, that's just a ridiculous villain. But the fact that he shows nothing. And then the second thing is like when he has this realization, oh, is this what it was like? Is this what the era of war was like? I can't wait to bring this back. When I'm in power, I'm going to bring all of this back. Like that aha. You just realize that this is the most dangerous person in the world because of that combination of things. Like just I feel nothing. I want to feel something. And look at this chaos. I can't wait to bring this back to make me feel something again.
So one of the supporting characters in this movie raises a lot of questions. So Kiga Koyata, aka the woodsman or the hunter, aka question mark? What else is this guy? Like, what is the storyline that you think plays out with him?
Okay, so that is a really good question because I was wondering that a whole lot because, he doesn't seem to feel pain. Cool, and they play that up for comedy early on. He has prodigious appetites.
Insatiable,
for insatiable appetites sexually. Also. Seems to be sexually omnivorous, which is delightful and played for laughs, but it is pretty entertaining. And then he is definitely killed with a sword through the neck. And at the end, shows up and is like talking to Shinsemen's nephew, the one other survivor, Shinroku, and he's like, "Well, I saw you die," and he's like, "Yeah, this isn't as bad as like fighting bears, that I do. You samurais, you're kind of whatever." And then he goes prancing off. I was wondering, like, is he like a god, a demigod, a yokai, like a ghost monster kind of thing? And it got me wondering as well if a Japanese audience, like if he is coded a certain way that we're missing for being Westerners watching this film. Like if a Japanese audience is like, oh, because he did this, this, and this, obviously he is this thing. Like the bad example would be like if we're watching a movie and then there's somebody dressed in green and is like, I can't wait to get back to my pot of gold. And you're like, oh, obviously that, that's a leprechaun. So I think he may have been a supernatural entity. That's my thought.
For me, it was so funny because I did not pick up on any of this, this most recent viewing, until I was like, hang on, didn't he die? Because all I could kind of think of is that he was there to be this Toshiro Mifune character from Seven Samurai, and like all the Kurosawa movies. Someone is just like a little bit funny, a little comedic.
The outsider.
Tried to do right. And so all I could see was that. But then when I kind of was like, hey, hang on, what's going on? Why is he back? And I read up on it. My favorite theory was that no one else saw him, and that it was just Shinroku who saw him because he represented something for his life. He was the one who was kind of wobbling between Samurai's life or doing something different. He was the one who was kind of saying, but going back to his wife or doing this, and constantly going through this shift. So the idea that no one else actually saw him, and it was only his own representation of kind of like going through, this versus that really resonated with me. It's like, okay, that was his internal struggle to say, do I go this life or that life? So then at the end of it, he was just like, every argument that they have, oh, you samurai are so nuts, your sense of honor, you're this and that, it's no fun. That's what that all represented. So for me, I love that. That's what I'm going to go with.
That's really, I like that argument a lot, especially because I think like Shinroku's wife and Upashi, the object of desire of Kiga, are played by the same woman, and you're right. There is that bit where Kiga's talking about how amazing this woman is, and he's speaking only to Shinroku at the time because they're like on night watch kind of thing. But I don't know. But other people talk about the woodsman. They hit him in the head with sticks. They chat about how great he is.
They cut him out of a tree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. So the first time I saw this movie, I was, what's the right way to put it? I wasn't thinking too seriously about it. I was like, oh, that's weird. I thought he died. All right, whatever. This was awesome. And then kind of looked it up after, like Michael did. And then it's okay, well, there's different permutations. To your point, Evan, it's like maybe he's some sort of demon, whatever. Like they're in the mountains around trees. That's a spot where there's lots of these spirit kind of creatures. Okay, Upashi, when they see her, when he has that flashback for a moment, is eating something, the contents of which I'm very upset to consider. Anyway, and it's like, okay, is this a thing that demons or whatever, with these evil spirits or whatever would be doing? But also, like, the other version that I heard besides the one that Michael had was that everybody died. Even Shinroku died. And they're actually just meeting kind of on the way to the afterlife or, whatever, that kind of thing too. Because when he's like, hey, you died. And he's like, I'll see you in the next life. It was like, okay, well, so, and I don't know one way or the other that you can really say it's any of them. Because you're like, okay, it could be that, it could be this. And Takashi Miike has never really said, oh, he's this. So he's been very tight-lipped ever since.
But I feel like that everybody's dead theory is undercut by the final shot of the film, which is
Tsuya,
Shinroku's wife, or certainly the woman that he's living with, like coming, like the shot of her like basically looking up and
smiling,
like smiling at somebody off camera.
Yeah.
And so in theory, that's Shinroku coming home, right?
I agree. It's really the, like, I think we can poke holes in any of these theories just as well as anything else. But I do think, tying it back to something Michael said earlier, part of his role is to point out the goofiness, the insanity, the whatever of the way samurai do things, right? And I think that's something that this character kind of helps make a little bit more sense of, is this way of like honor and duty where you just have to get yourself killed for all these stupid reasons and whatever. Like, this is dumb. You guys are dumb. All of you samurai are crazy. And I think it does help underscore a little bit the point of, Shinzemon and the crew. Like, there's a sense of like individual honor and duty that they're carrying out, which he still thinks is a little bit batty, but at least it's the fun version of it seems.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be totally into Shinroku's plan of like going to America and becoming a bandit. And I really like that Shinroku kind of like shuts him down. It's like, you're not coming, which is sort of like, just like, say hi to Apache for me. And he goes like, okay, and goes skipping off, hopping over dead bodies and
clicking
dead horses,
his heels,
clicking his heels. I kind of dug as well, like Shinzaimon's like dying words, which like I paraphrase here, but basically like, being a samurai sucks.
Yeah,
and it's great. This whole movie is just delighted me.
Well, so good question then. Do you think this is a movie you're going to come back to?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. I'm definitely going to watch this again.
Michael, how about you?
I won't seek this out. The next one on my list is probably going to be Seven Samurai, just to go back and kind of look at the original sort of inspiration. When this comes up again, I will happily watch it. It's not going to be on my list to go and rewatch, but I really enjoyed watching this again. Really enjoyed it.
And for fourth time watcher Chris,
Yeah,
is there going to be a fifth?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that works in favor of this movie is that it starts with 13. So it's very high on the list of movies that I see when I'm going into things. And it's at the top of one of my movie lists as a result of the title. So it's very easy to remember that it's there and to go watch it. But I mean, I'll probably come back to it again in a few years. I think like Michael said, though, like one of the things this makes me want to go do is watch other samurai movies, right? So there's some more that Takashi Miike has made that I'm interested in digging into, which includes another performance from Koji Yakusho. So, that one, obviously some of the Kurosawa movies, just going back and watching those. I rewatched the original, or not rewatched, watched for the first time, the original 13 Assassins. And the remake is far better. I find the pacing and the cinematography and everything isn't nearly as good in Eiichi Kudo's version of the original version of this movie. But like, definitely wanted to go back and watch some of those other samurai classics, just as a like, oh yeah, this twigs memories for me, and I'd love to go back and watch those. So, I think for all of us, this has been a fun watch. How soon we come back to it, I don't know, but definitely for me, gets me onto the desire to pull that thread of other samurai movies and see where that takes me. And that's probably a good spot to call it for this week. So that is what we thought about 13 Assassins. And we would love to know what you thought about this movie. You can always find us on Twitter at How Did You Miss This? That's HDYMT_pod. While you're there, take a look at some of the movies that we're planning on watching soon. Send us any questions you might have, or if there's even a movie that you might have missed. If you enjoy what we're doing, do us a favor, take a second to rate or review or subscribe wherever you happen to be listening to us. And we'll be back next week when we'll be watching Miller's Crossing and seeing whether this mob movie can get away with the crossing the boss or whether it should stay missed. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you then.